I'm Becky Stewart, and we've been part of fellowship for trying to do the math here, been part of fellowship for about 36, 37 years. My family moved up here from Mississippi, and I was reared in a godly home, and my parents took us to church every time it was open, and came to know Jesus when I was a child, and continued to try to learn more about him and be more like him every day, all these years, and struggle with that sometimes, with the tasks set before us and the high calling, as the scripture tells us. But I've seen a lot of growth. I've seen some dry seasons, I've seen some hard seasons, and some really good seasons, and he's faithful. When we moved up here, I was expecting our second daughter. It was a total career change for my late husband, Steve, and we didn't know a soul in Bentonville, but that wasn't that big a deal back then because Bentonville wasn't very big, so we plugged in. We really embraced, though, the New Testament model of gathering to celebrate and learn, and the discipleship that goes into that, and then literally breaking bread together and being in one another's homes through the week. And I'm an extrovert. I'm energized by that. But even people who are not need community. We were built for community. And there's so many one another's in the scripture that love one another and encourage one another and help one another and serve one another. Another one we don't talk about very much, but the responsibility we have to hold one another accountable. And I saw all of that in our very first community group, and then just grown from that over the years. Still in one community group with some of the people I was in my very first community group with. It has changed a lot over those years. But I have such FOMO. I'm actually in 4 groups because they meet different needs. I have one that's very homogeneous. It's older widows. And then I have one I'm the token boomer geezer in it. It's all these young professionals, a lot of internationals. And then the longtime group that I've been in, and a Tuesday morning women's ministry group. And they hit me at different points of what I need. I loved being in the multi-generational groups. Seeing these young moms and helps me relate to my daughters better. But I also love being in these groups of people who have experienced the same things I have. This widows group, it's just different when you feel so totally heard by somebody who's walked the same road. So there's a community group for everybody, even all of us who are a little different and have different needs at different seasons. We need each other, and God created that need in us, and I think he honors that through cell groups, all our small groups that are going on, and in the bigger sense of community. That word gets thrown around a lot, but it says we're together.
Man, I could watch that one 5 more times. Becky Stewart, if you're in here, thank you for sharing your life with us. There's something about a seasoned follower of Jesus whose passion is still increasing and on the rise. And I love that, she finds that life with people who know her, right? People who've been through some of the same things that she's walked through, but also she loves getting into a room with people who the only thing they have in common is that they follow Jesus. And I think that's beautiful. As much as that video is an encouragement to our whole mission and vision here at Fellowship of how we do cell and celebration in our small group ministry, and it is that, it's also a very tangible introduction into this topic or this theme that we're going to be in for the next 4 weeks called Give Your Life Away. We've got Philippians coming in September, but we wanted to pause and take 4 weeks kind of in this August transition season and talk about what it looks like to live for something greater than ourselves, what it looks like to live generously. And so we're talking generosity. How would you describe that? Here's a definition: giving more of something that is necessary or expected. And I know many of you just heard generosity, and you're like, okay, here we go, right? Capital campaign, we're talking about finances. That is one of the 4 topics that we'll cover. This is a way of life series, a chance to pause and say, is there something bigger than just me and my desires and my wants happening, and how can I find God's purpose in that? So 2 main reasons that we're really talking about this. Number 1 is that generosity is rooted in the nature and character of God himself. Romans 8:32, he who did not spare his own son, but gave him for us all, how will he not also with him graciously give us all things? The reason that God calls his people to a life of graciousness and generosity is because he is generous and gracious. I think of John 3:16, most famous verse in the Bible. For God so loved the world that he gave his son, his one and only son. Or Ephesians 2:8-9, for it is by grace that you've been saved. This is not of your own doing. It is a gift from God. At his core, God is a giving God. So that alone is enough reason to study this. But also, I think it's important to note that this concept of living for something outside of ourselves is counter to our humanity. Matthew 16, Jesus is speaking to his disciples, and he's helping them reframe or shift their view on how they will find life. And he says, if you seek to live for yourself, to save your own life, to preserve yourself, that will result in a loss. But if you deny yourself for something greater, to follow me, he says, that's where you're actually going to find life. And I get that this statement, this statement by Jesus is rooted in salvation, but it's also daily and practically lived. But the idea of giving our lives away is specifically counter to our American culture. I went through like 6 different surveys and studies this week just looking at American cultural values. And each person had kind of a different take on it, but there were 2 things that carried consistently in every single one of them, and it was our value of individualism and freedom. Mark Sayers is an Australian pastor who's made some observations on this, and he says that all people of all time in any part of the world have 3 buckets that we as humans need filled in order to experience a full life. We need meaning, we need purpose, we need something that we're living for. But we also need people. We need community. We don't want to do that alone. We want people around us living life. But those 2 things aren't enough. We actually do need freedom. We need the ability to make our own decisions and not be overtaken by certain constraints. Now, I've shared this before, but here in America, this isn't hard to figure out. We blow one of these up, sometimes to the detriment of the other 2, and it is freedom, right? The American way is to view every single person as a self-sufficient person, not representative of a family or a people group or anything like that, which is very different than in biblical times or even in other parts of the world. And there are positive aspects to this. An independent, non-conformist spirit can be an asset to following Jesus. And we see that play out all the way, through the early church, but even in the times of Israel, where there are times that we have to stand even alone against oppressive voices and systems. But a proper theological understanding of individualism is that we, you, me, each of us, are created in the image of God. That's what we studied earlier this year. That's where we find our worth, but we live that out in the context of others, with our eyes up, seeing what God is doing in and around us. Self-centered individualism leads directly to dissension, isolation, depression, and comparison. I think Elsa is probably the greatest example of that when she says, no right, no wrong, no rules for me, I'm free. Some of you are really struggling not to sing right now, right? Let it go. Not trying to judge the hearts of people here, okay? But I don't think Elsa knew Jesus if she was a human, because there is something about following Jesus that is at least a bit counter to this, if not in complete opposition to this concept. Because when we study the life of Jesus, we see a different call for our lives, that we are vessels. We are a pass-through of the life that God brings in order to show that and live that with other people. You might say we're blessed to be a blessing or blessed to bless others. We see in Scripture that we are abounding in order to be generous. And some of this is going to feel a bit like we have to change the way we think and live as we start to keep our eyes outward. And that may be a little difficult because of the way in which we live and the ways that we're being discipled by other people around us. But the vision for all of this isn't just rooted in Scripture. The vision for living a life that we give away to others is rooted in the very character and nature of God himself. Losing your life, giving your life away, looking to the needs of others, that is the way of Jesus. And that's why we're here and why we want to study this. So we're going to hit 4 different areas for the sake of time. I'm just going to jump right into mine, which is time. Have you ever tried to define that word or that concept? Here's a go at it. Time is the indefinite sequence of existence and events that occurs in an irreversible succession from the past through the present into the future. So a couple things. Indefinite doesn't mean unending. It means unknown ending. We don't know when time will end. And irreversible succession means that we can't stop it, we can't slow it down, and once it happens, we can't change it. So put that into perspective. At any moment, this moment, the past has already happened. The future is not here yet. The only moment that we ever have to live in is the present. Meaning we can never honor God with what we will do tomorrow, but only that which we choose to do today in this moment. You might call time the most treasured resource or the most endangered resource that we have. You can't accumulate it like money. You can't stockpile it and save it for later like goods and materials. We are all forced to spend it every single day and all at the same fixed rate of 60 seconds per minute. It's a weird concept. Even talking about stewarding it, because it's not a thing that exists. It's something that we exist in. And it feels very ominous sometimes that time cannot be undone. Maybe in multiverses and time travel and things that we try to create, but in reality, it's much simpler and it's limited. We don't know when it will end, except that it will end. Time might be the biggest enemy of us planning a service on Sunday mornings. We have about 65 minutes on paper. We usually go over that. And we want every minute to be used for impact. And we know the traffic issues. We know how long it takes to check in kids. And so we have to decide, how are we going to use the first 5 to 10 minutes when half of the people aren't in here? This morning, we chose to show a Hollywood quality video. And if you got in late, I am sorry for you. You need to go watch the live stream because you missed a salvation opportunity. But don't turn around, and I know that means you're going to turn around. When I teach, there's a clock staring me down, counting down the time I have left. And I never obey it. I always see it and I ignore it. And y'all are like, yeah, we know, you need to obey it. I can't give you more time. I can't give myself more time. I wish I could. I once heard someone say that a lot of the theological things about God that we struggle to understand come down to our inability to understand how he works within time. That we are constrained by time in this succession, but that he is not. Think about it. Predestination or free will or God's sovereignty, answered prayers. He wants us to pray, but he already knows what's going to happen. And so much of us being in this linear movement of events and moments makes it difficult for our brains to comprehend who God is and the way he works. Here in the U.S., we use time as a commodity. I've already said that, a resource. Time is money, right? We start to weigh how we use it. And is this task worth my time, or is it worth me paying someone to do it? We value well-organized people who have task lists and can fit a ton of things into time. And not every part of the world shares our perspective on this. To many foreigners, I bet if they come here, we look like robots, so tied to our phones and to our schedules. If you've ever been abroad, you've probably experienced this tension where you show up somewhere where everyone said they were going to be there at 3, and they're not there till 7. You're like, do they not respect time? And we just see it very differently. But what does Jesus say about this? Scripture gives us a lot about time, how fleeting it is. But really, what I want to do is look briefly at a passage that we don't normally associate with time. But the reason is because this is a passage on purpose. And to understand how to use time, we have to understand our purpose. So it's Matthew chapter 5, the beginning of what we would call Sermon on the Mount. Jesus is speaking to his disciples about the purpose of their lives. He knows that his time is limited. He's said multiple times already that my hour has not yet come. He knows that his time is ticking. He knows that their time is limited, and he addresses them with very intentional vision for their lives. Now, before we read through it quickly, I want to talk about the two analogies that Jesus calls out here, salt and light. So let's go back to first century to understand why he would pick these two. We got to remember, electricity is not a thing at this point, and so there's no refrigerators, there's no light switches and light bulbs, anything like that. So these things had a much larger value in daily use than they do today. Two main purposes for salt in that day, flavoring and preservation. Flavoring, we understand, right? In the right quantity, salt makes food taste better. It enhances flavor. By itself, it kind of tastes terrible. But when it's added to something, it makes the other thing more enjoyable. It's outward focused. Salt was also used heavily to preserve foods. So when salt is added to food, it takes away some of that excess water that is in foods. And that excess water is where bacteria and pathogens can grow and actually cause food to spoil. So when you put salt on something, it helps prolong the life or slow down that spoiling process. You can trace salt all the way through the Old Testament. Alex and I have been in a study of Leviticus, and even in Leviticus 2 this last week, I was reading, and it's right there in the grain offering. There's major use of salt. Light, too, has deep roots in Scripture. The second verse of the Bible addresses darkness. The third verse, light, spoken from the words of God. And because there's no electricity or light bulbs, lamps were vital and had to be strategically placed in order to provide the most light possible for a specific room in a dark place. They had to be cared for and maintained, and their very presence provided the ability for others around them to thrive. So with that in context, how outward-facing these two are, it makes the words of Jesus mean just a little bit more as we read it. And what we see in this idea of salt and light is that as he's talking to his disciples, he's reminding them, your purpose, our purpose, is bigger than ourselves. You are the salt of the earth, the light of the whole world. So let your light shine before others, that they may see you, that their eyes would be pointed back to give glory to the Father who is in heaven. Salt and light don't have much purpose for themselves. They're useful for the good of others around them. Alex and I took a weekend to get away last weekend to pray and plan for the coming year of our life and our marriage. That's the spiritual way of describing what we did. We also just wanted to get away from 3 screaming children for 2 nights. And one of the questions that she asked me on the way there was, she said, hey, I want to talk about this weekend. What do you think God has specifically designed you for on this earth? Not what's the purpose of humanity, what's your purpose? And so she asked me and I asked her, like most things in marriage, our answers drastically different. I said, I think God has designed me to catalyze ministry and vision and to connect people. And Alex said that God has designed her to be a safe place for people to land when they're hurting and just need someone to love them and provide a space to be heard and known. So which of us has found what salt and light looks like? Both of us. Because it can look very differently in very different humans, right? There's no right or wrong in that sense, but there is a commonality. Part of following Jesus and being a light and salt in this world is believing that we exist for the benefit of others as a pipeline or channel to flow God's blessings through. Our purpose is bigger than ourselves. But we also see that presence alone is not what God has called us to, because we can be present and still be ineffective. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, or if a lamp is put under a basket, it's hidden, then it's not doing what it was meant to be doing. I'm not a chemist, but from what I understand, salt does not naturally break down really on its own over time. It can stay there for a while, which is why some of your salt shakers have been there for like 20 years, and it's still the same stuff in it. But what happens is, over time, impurities can come in, and it changes the dynamic and the makeup of the salt mixture, right? Particles get mixed in, and its ability to be fully effective is not there anymore. So now it tastes weird, or it doesn't provide the preservation that it's supposed to. So what they would do is they would actually take salt, and its new use after it had lost its effectiveness would be to be thrown on paths to kill weeds and to create a compact place for people to walk. So its new use literally became to be trampled on. Think about light. It does not matter how brightly a light is shining. If it is put under a basket, if it is covered up, it is not going to be effective. It has to be strategically placed without barriers in order to affect things around it. And an implied principle of lights here is that over time, what's going to happen to that lamp? It will run out. Think of any light, right? Candle, filament bulbs, even LEDs. We're learning to prolong them, but they are finite things. And so there are different ways as followers of Jesus to lose effectiveness over time: by impurity, by hiding, or simply by running out of time. And you're probably sitting here going, what does this have to do with time? This is salt and light. This is looking outwards. Everything. Because the only way to utilize time well is to have a proper vision of, why am I even here? What is my purpose on this earth? I realize when we say stewarding your time and talk about time being finite, that we have this reaction, or at least I do, of like, man, I got to get at it. Time's a ticking. I've got to utilize it as best as I can. I've got to fill it with good things. And when we take on that attitude, you and I will naturally always feel behind. You're single, and you feel behind because you're not married. You're living in an apartment, you feel behind because you don't own a home. With these interest rates, with this housing market, how am I ever going to do that, right? Or maybe you own a home, but you don't own a rent house. Or maybe you do have a rent house, but you don't own 10 rent houses like everybody else. Or maybe you haven't been to Europe yet, and everyone on Instagram has, and they're flying first class. What have I done with my life? And it's just this constant comparison that when our standard is others, it actually makes us discontent with the time and place that Jesus has us in. Mark Schatzman reminds me consistently, Hunter, you can do it all. You're a high-capacity guy. You can do it all, just not right now. Every season has an assignment. Find your assignment and be present in that moment wherever God has you. And so I'm learning more and more that stewarding time is less of a work-life balance, less about healthy percentages of my time being spent on secular things or spiritual things, and it's about learning to walk moment by moment in the Spirit so that all things I do are spiritual, so that no one who follows Jesus ever works a secular job, because the Spirit is always working in and through you. It makes 1 Corinthians 10:31 just come to life, that whatever we do, whether it's eating or drinking, it doesn't matter, do it all for the glory of God. Every moment can be a moment unto the Lord. Every moment. You may think, well, Hunter, you're a pastor. What do pastors even do with their days? Like, you've got all this time in your life to do this. I am not immune. On top of a typical 40 to 50 hour work week, Alex and I are leading a community group. She's leading cell groups on Wednesday nights, hosting leaders at our house for training, trying to Sabbath once a week. We've got soccer a couple of nights a week for 2 different kids. And so by default, this fall, 6 of our 7 nights a week are allocated for the next 3 months. I don't like that. Just to be honest. In fact, Rochelle last week walked us through a practice of being honest with God. So I spent some time being honest with the Lord, and I told him in a moment, hey, God, I am not a fan of time, the concept that you created. I don't like it. It's sad. It goes quickly. Google Photos reminds me of it all the time, and I just sit and cry alone. I don't love how fast it goes or how ominous it feels, and there are signs everywhere that it's just ticking. I'm going gray at 34. And not Seth Primgray where I look like a model, right? It's like I didn't wipe my face after eating a powdered donut is what mine looks like. And there are signs all around us that time is just ticking. Parents, this is a week that you will feel it. Every week when we drop kids off in the early childhood area, even if you're not parents, you may have seen this. There's these reminders on the left side, these jars that show you how many weeks you have left in the home with your kids. I sat with a coworker today who just became an empty nester this week, dropped their daughter off at college. And it's just all hitting. In fact, Alex and I use the Parent Cue app, which our children's ministry recommends. And here's my homepage. I have to put funny pictures of my kids up so that I'll laugh when I cry, because it just reminds me every single week, that's how many weeks I have left with them. It hits me hard. But you know what it does? It changes the way I see my time. It changes the way I see moments, the way I see my phone, the way I see hobbies, projects, whatever it is. But you may ask, where is the joy in time passing so quickly? Without the hope of eternity, I don't know, to be honest. And it's that anchor of what Christ has accomplished and the hope of a promised unending eternity that breathes life into these moments today. We make the most of our time, not by filling it with more things, but by being present with the Spirit of God in moments to live in a way that brings Him glory. We are a pass-through, a vessel, a conduit, not to the neglect of our own souls, but to their benefit and to those around us. By the way, this idea of living our perspective as salt and life and light and giving our lives away is not in contrast to what we just studied all summer with spiritual rhythms. You may be feeling that like, we were just told to Sabbath and rest and disconnect and say no. Now you're like, just go give your life away. They go together because the only healthy giving away of ourselves will overflow out of the grounded walk with Jesus on a daily basis. I want to give us a couple of takeaways because we don't drift into healthy time any more than we drift into healthy marriage or healthy finances or anything like that. And this is less, I'm trying to think about this as less of stewarding my time and stewarding my life within time. So 4 things, hopefully one of these hits with you. Prayer. Write a short, simple prayer that's specific to you, that you can just pray every moment. Here's mine, or every morning. God, make me aware of where you're working. Just help me to get my eyes up today. Wherever I go, will you make me aware of what you're already doing? Rick Warren is one of the first people that I heard give this idea of devoting daily, withdrawing weekly, and abandoning annually. But it makes sense with everything we've studied. Spend time daily with the Lord. Learn to Sabbath weekly, and then at least once a year, disconnect to realign what your purpose is in life. Mark moments of God's faithfulness to remember how He's been faithful in time. We call those memorial stones. Our community group is multiplying tonight. There's a lot of sadness around it. We've been together for a year. And so our final evening this evening is to share these. Everybody's bringing something to share about God's faithfulness over the last year. So if you forgot, here's your reminder. You got 4 hours to figure it out. But then resources. I love this book. It's called Every Moment Holy. It's a book of prayers and liturgies for everyday moments that we can just pause and read to remind ourselves that God is present in the moment. Things like changing diapers, sunsets, stargazing, starting a job, the marking of a birthday, the morning of a yard sale, or a medical procedure. There's one for people who experience road rage. It starts with this. First line, if my heart were more content in you, O Lord, I would be less inclined to rage at others. Some of you are like, I could use that 45 minutes ago. It would have been great. I told Alex I need a liturgy for cranking a weed eater because that's the most unholy moment of my day. It's like, Lord, speak truth into me in this moment. But the author reminds us in this book that there are no unsacred moments, only sacred moments, and moments that we've forgotten are sacred. Every moment can be a moment unto the Lord. And we can only give out of what we have. And that is why the gift of God in the person of Jesus is so large, because it overflows out of who He is and His generosity. And here's the truth. The life, death, and resurrection of Jesus changed every moment for all time. Eternity past, eternity future, and even this moment right now. And to do that, it took a life of generosity and a death of generosity from Jesus. He, of all people, deserved to be served, but even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. And it is mind-boggling for me to think that Jesus would step into this. Not just human form, not just earth, but y'all get, he stepped into time. Meaning, when he breathes his first, right, in a stable with his teenage mother and all these animals, from that moment, his clock is ticking towards his death. And it's only with that in view of God's generosity that we will ever find the purpose, the high calling that we are called to follow him and steward the life that he's given us while we're on this earth. Stewarding those moments to know him deeply and to make him known. To end our time, I want to invite two of my friends up, Tori Tutt and Andrew Ogden. I was thinking about how to end this and thought, man, it'd be good to hear from other people, not just me. And these are two people that I respect so much and have gotten to do a lot of life with. Tori and I worked together as co-workers for 7 years. Best 7 years of your life, right? Yeah. And I got to see her walk through so many different seasons, coming in as a single in full-time ministry, then marrying one of my good friends, still being in full-time ministry, now a mom, small business owner, so lots of change. Andrew is just up here because I heard someone say that if you have a British accent, you're immediately the smartest person in the room. So is that true?
Well, let me check who's here. My wife's on the front row, so that was a really short.
Second smartest. She's got a British accent.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
But these are two people who are up here not because they do this perfectly. They're in the thick of life, but I've watched them and learned from them in so many ways on how they keep their eyes on Jesus. So ask them to just come share what is the Lord teaching you right now in concept of time and stewardship.
If you guys know Hunter and I's relationship at all, he likes to pick on me, and I learned first service that I kind of was putting the dots together, and I'm like, of course, he knew I was nervous to come up here, and so he's going to stick me up here with the smartest person in the room.
That's good.
Okay.
Classic. So I'm going to pass the ball to Andrew and let him share, and then if we have time, I might throw in a couple things.
I don't want to say anything right now. You know, my mum sometimes watches this service on YouTube, so I can just picture her wiping the tears of laughter from her face. So, that suggestion. So I wanted to share a little bit about prioritizing and life priorities. And there are seasons where my wife Jane and I, in fact, she loves nothing better than a deep and meaningful planning meeting with a spreadsheet and a list. It's not her love language. But it's important to us that we talk about life's priorities and prayerfully consider those at different stages of life. And for us right now, I can list those for you, and it might be different for you, but for us right now, it's our relationship with God comes first. Our spouse, our husband or wife is second, then our children comes third, then friends and family, and then work. And we like to look at how we prioritize our time through that lens and through that list. And when things are going really well, and we're considering those priorities in our lives, all of those things just seem to work. So when you follow the first commandment and put God first, then that has a good impact on your marriage. And when you put your marriage second, that has a good impact on how you parent your children. And then with your friends and family. And then lastly, if all those four things are good, then work's good too, and you can really focus on that and do that well. So that's been a really helpful model for us, just to assess kind of how we prioritize our time. But it's not about quantity of time, because of course, number 5 is where a lot of us spend the most of our time, is in the workplace. So it's not about quantity, it's about how you prioritize. And Tori, you've been through many seasons in a short space of time. Do you want to share a bit about what that means for you?
Yeah, absolutely. When Hunter asked me to come up and share, I was like, I'm 30 years old. I don't know if I can share to this large group of people. I'm sure there are people that know how to manage their time a lot better than I do and are doing it better. But I just wanted to share a little bit about what the Lord's been teaching me in the last few years, teaching Carter and I. And, I was kind of reminiscing back on the last 3 years and coming and working for FSM and being single in ministry. I remember thinking like, man, I have so much time to do all of these things. And it almost felt like there were too many things that I wanted to do and I didn't have enough time to do them. But I was getting to disciple college girls and drive to Fayetteville and sit across from them and have coffee and talk about Jesus for 3 hours. And I could wake up early and go to bed late. And I felt like I had all this time. And then I got married when I met my husband. And I was like, oh, time's not really going to change. It's fine. Not the case at all. Did not gain more time. I actually was more divided. And so the Lord was teaching me something through that season. And then we were pregnant with our son, and I started dreaming with Carter about what it looked like to step off of staff, doing full-time ministry and become a stay-at-home mom. And I'm like, man, stay-at-home mom, I'm going to have so much free time, like to do all the things. And you laugh because you know that's not true. I quickly realized I did not gain more time. And in each of those seasons, I found myself having more divided time and more things needing my attention. And I was talking to Carter about all of this, and we just started praying through Psalm 90. And that's kind of been a theme verse for us in this season of motherhood and trying to figure out what it looks like, because I'm learning there's not really more time that we get. It's just different seasons, and all seasons are good. And within each of those seasons, desiring to glorify the Lord with every bit of time that he has given us. And so Psalm 90 has been a prayer of ours of, teach me, Lord, to number my days so that I may gain a heart of wisdom. And if you're asking the Lord to teach you something, you have to be willing to learn something. And so it's been a learning curve for Carter and I to learn what it looks like to steward the time that God has given us in the season that we're in, even though it looks drastically different than how it has every single year of the last 3 years. And so.
Yeah, that's awesome, Tori. And, knowing what to say yes and no to, and that you talked about asking God for wisdom and discernment, is really important to then be a good steward of that time. I also like just really practically a couple of things on my mind. One is in relationship and the friends and family I mentioned that we build around us, but just being really intentional about who those people are. So we have conversations about, so who are those people that we want to invest time in, spend more time with, learn from, and share our lives with. And that's really important. And then the second one is about how do you combine some of your activities so that you can really invest in those relationships. So just on Friday night, we were at the high school. I think a lot of you were as well as parents. And you sit there for 3 hours in the stands to watch your kid for 2 minutes, right? And it felt like a great time to just sit with other people and invest in those relationships and connect with others whilst you're waiting for that to happen. So sharing part of your lives and also investing in friendships at the same time is a really good way of doing that. The other way is just meals. Like you've got to eat. So why not eat with somebody else and share that time together?
Yeah, that's really good. I think just thinking through you and Jane and being able to go to those activities with your family. I think Carter and I are in a season where we're confined to nap schedules and early bedtimes, and so it looks less like us going places right now and more like inviting people into our home and trying to make a priority of that, because how we want to utilize our time is to invest in our community, because we see that scripturally and our souls need that time, but it looks different. So it looks less of going and more inviting for us in this season. And so
do y'all have just maybe one thing that you would leave everybody with as we kind of close down?
So just one thing the Lord's been speaking to me about this week, and then reinforced this morning as we sang that line, lead me in your love to those around me, in the song Build My Life. And as you think about those relationships and where you spend time, we feel challenged and ask ourselves, like, who do we know that doesn't know the Lord? Like, who are we spending time with that doesn't know Jesus? And And sometimes it's different seasons. That can be your own children, and that's your mission field, is your own family. And other times that's more outward looking, as we talked about salt and light. So that's the one thought of, within your friendship circles, who doesn't know the Lord, and maybe you can reach out to others.
Yeah, that's good. A prayer of mine has been recently just asking the Lord to show me more of his presence in the season that I'm in, and not so much asking him for more time, because it's more so been a heart cry of mine to be like, Lord, I know I do not have as much time. It feels like that I used to, and so what would bring you the most glory today? And that's all that I ask, and that's all that I want, and giving myself grace in that season. And so I think an encouragement in whatever season you're in whatever capacity that you have, remembering to give yourself grace, and continue to learn what it looks like to walk with Jesus and be faithful, because I don't want to miss out on the moments that the Lord has placed before me because I'm fixated on what's next. So I think give myself grace.
Great reminders. Every moment can be a moment unto the Lord, even this one. And by the way, this is a lot like what community group looks like. Imperfect people, taking the scripture, understanding how we walk in this world and encouraging each other. And so we want to end with a couple of reminders. One is a thank you. 2 weeks ago, Abel Schaefer was preaching, and he gave us a call to serve, to step in and meet some of the needs for kids and other areas on Sunday mornings. And 101 people signed up and said yes. And so we want to say thank you for investing that time. So there are still some needs, but a major dent was taken in that. And so we are very grateful. I, as a father, am very grateful that people are stepping in each week so my wife and I can worship. And so thank you for saying yes in that. Tell them about house worship.
Yeah, you may have heard of this before, but we've been gathering in people's homes and just worshiping together, kind of midweek for a couple of hours. We kind of do it once a month, normally that kind of cadence, and it's open to anybody to come along and join us. You don't have to be a musician or in worship in particular, but we get together in a home, we spend time just in the Lord's presence, having fellowship, singing songs, sharing scripture, praying, and it's been really beautiful and important part of our the way that we spend our time and focusing on the Lord. So if that's something that sounds good to you, that you want to spend more time in worship of him in that kind of setting, I'll be down here at the front today. You can come see me. If it's a long line and you want to rush to your car, just come grab me at any week and we can get you connected. But we just send an email out and let you know when the dates are of those. We'd love to have you.
That's awesome. If you would stand with me, I would love for us as a congregation to fix our eyes on Jesus. I'm going to read this prayer over us as a benediction, and just take a deep breath and take it in. But this is just a charge for the week and a prayer. It's from the Every Moment Holy book that Hunter had mentioned. This is a book that Carter and I open daily. There are so many different liturgies for moments. And so here's one focused on community. And so here's this prayer. Our lives are so small, O Lord, our vision so limited, our courage so frail, our hours so fleeting. Therefore, give us grace and guidance for the journey ahead. We are gathered here because we believe that we are called together into a work we cannot yet know the fullness of. Still, we trust the voice of the one who has called us. And so we offer to you, O God, these things, our dreams, our plans, our vision. Shape them as you will. Our moments and our gifts, may they be invested toward bright, eternal ends. Let us listen for your voice, our hearts ever open to the quiet beckonings of your Spirit in this endeavor. Let us, in true humility and poverty of spirit, remain ever ready to move at the impulse of your love in paths of your design.
Amen. Hey, if you want to take a moment to be prayed with or prayed for, we have our prayer team over here, my right, your left. We would love to do that. And for connecting, we've got community groups who will launch over the next couple of weeks. So we'd love to get you connected at the booth in the foyer. We will see you guys next week.